I'll just start, at the beginning. So I'll talk to you about sort of Indian design and an Indian designer, sort of everywhere, and I think the journey, as I said, is quite important, because it's very difficult for me to disconnect the professional and the personal, because they're so interlinked. So, but I will also talk, therefore, about what it takes to go from the car on the left, which you all recognize as an Indica, which came out in 97, 98, and also what it takes to go from that car to the car on the right, which is, I hope also you recognize. It's called the Tiago, uh, which we uh, which we launched a few years ago, and is quite a sort of important brand for us. Um, so, of course, I've had the fortune of working in some of the largest sort of automotive companies in the last 20 years. So that's that journey, basically, what started it off, the car on the left, and how we got to the car on the right. I also, Manisha and Debashis, want to talk about what it takes to go from a sheet of paper, which is a sketch you see on the left, to a product in a sheet of steel, and which is the image you see on the right. Uh, like I said, one is a professional journey, one is a private journey, but both of them are linked. But I think it's important to start at the beginning. My life, like everyone's life, I'm sure, has been shared or shaped by some very key moments. And this is where your personal and private life interacts with what your professional life would be. So these are those key moments where the private and the professional actually came together. The first key moment, of course, growing up in India in the 70s and 80s, we didn't get to see a lot of cars at all, let alone global cars. But what you did see, of course, was the ubiquitous Fiat and Ambassador, and once in a while, occasionally, you would see a foreign car or an imported car, either belonging to a big industrialist or a movie star or a or a mafia, gangster. But you saw very few cars, and one of the sort of key moments for me was to see this car. It's the S Class, as you know, from few generations ago. It was called the W126 as a code name. This is really the car which started it all off. I happened to see that car in front of this building. This building, you all know, again, is a Taj hotel in Bombay, and I lived very close to this building. So one day I was just walking by the sea, and I saw that car in front of this building. I would have been in school then, and while I knew, or I was just becoming aware that there's a professional profession called architecture that designs buildings, I was really unaware of a profession of industrial design or car design. But seeing that car standing in front of the building really made me sort of question and realize that there must be a profession somewhere that shapes products and automobiles and things around us. So of course I did a little more research. In those days it was pre internet. You tried and researched anything you could on design, and of course I read more and learned more, and realized that there is a profession of industrial design, product design, that they teach at NID. Of course, there was no automotive design at that point. Anyway, so of course, this is who I am, born and raised in India, and then I worked in Italy, I've worked in the UK, I studied in the UK as well, I've worked in Japan. So I'll just take you through a little of that journey. NID is, of course, where it all started, the real design training for me. Uh, it allowed us to, or dared us to do a few things, which is very unique at NID. One is it dares you to dream. A designer without a dream is, in my view, not a designer at all, because you are the one who really can foresee the future. You will see in any company that you join, most departments are kind of lag or post facto. They work on data which is generated uh, earlier. So if you look at marketing, if you look at finance, everything will scrutinize data which they already have generated. Design is one of the few professions and departments in a large company which can talk about the future. So daring to dream at NID, daring to think, thinking was is central to design. Design thinking has become very fashionable today. A lot of consultants are making a lot of money talking about design thinking, but thinking is fundamental to design. Uh, Dare you to drink? Of course, we were in a in a dry state, but once in a while, you would have to have the courage to 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 do this. But lots of conversations around that. Dare you to debate? I think the debate was never seen as a negative in NIT. Amongst your colleagues, your classmates, your seniors, your juniors, your teachers, your faculty, there was very healthy debate, very uh, how can I say, deep exchange of ideas, which of course came from the fact that you could question anything. And this is very important. Always keep this attitude to question things around you. Don't go by the status quo. I think that's the other thing designers in a professional environment must do. That you must question why you are doing things, how you are doing them, your company, your organization, your private practice, whatever it is. Uh, Learn throughout your life and your career to question things around you. That's when you will be asked to provide the answers. If people don't question, you don't need an answer. So these are a few things I think that NID really dared us to do. The most important one was it allowed us to sort of make mistakes or really explore. There was no right or wrong answer as long as you could stand behind what you were presenting. That is very, very important. You don't get so much opportunity to make mistakes later on in your life and career. So when you're in a educational institution, take the chance, take the risk. What's the worst that can happen? So but the best that can happen is that you learn from it. Anyway, the key moment too, when I was graduating, around when I was graduating from NIT, this car came out. Like I showed you in the slide earlier, it was the Indica. Really broke the rules of of car making globally. I mean, very few people could imagine that a developing country could could produce a small car. Of course, it wasn't designed by Tata Motors. It was designed by a consultant in Italy called IDEA Institute. I'll talk to you a little more about that, how life goes around in a circle. But that car was very, uh, revolutionary when it came out, and it really, how can I say, really made me want to work for a company like this. Again, I'll speak to you a little later or in your questions how you choose a company to work. And this is one of those moments which said, yes, I'm going to one day hopefully work for Tata Motors. When I graduated from NIT, I didn't through a sequence of events didn't get into Tata Motors or didn't join Tata Motors, but I did get a chance to go to Italy in a two-wheeler company called Piaggio. I was 20 something years old. I got on a plane and I went. It was supposed to be a 6 months, let's say, industrial experience and a project. But I still took the chance and went. And of course, it was in a very small little town in Tuscany, near Pisa, called Pontedera, and I reached and landed on a Sunday afternoon. Didn't speak a word of Italian, and like I said, anyone who knows anything about Italy, the worst possible day and time to go to Italy for the first time is on a Sunday afternoon. But like I said, your training and your education really kicks in the next day you go to work. So for Monday, I was at work. Um, for me, Piaggio was a great learning experience. We had a fantastic museum called the Piaggio Museum right next to the design studio. I would spend a lot of evenings and lunch times in this particular facility, where every single model that they had made in the last 70 years was actually, displayed, restored, maintained, beautifully curated. It was very important for me to understand the history of something before you can propose a future. Remember this, understand history of the brand, of the company, of the country that you're working in and for. If you really want to move, the game forward, don't become a slave to history, but always understand it. Of course, this was one of the first projects they gave me to do. It was a old Lambretta, and they said, can you just do something to it so that we can sell it in India? And this is where the questioning attitude came in. And I said, gentlemen, a product like this in India will not sell. So please don't underestimate the aspirations in India. And eventually through a series of discussions, we actually dropped this product, and Piaggio finally went to India with a very contemporary Vespa. Of course, I got a chance to work on many projects there. This was one of the first ones I did. It was called a Gilera Runner. Here again, your skill as a designer is very important, because one of the only mediums of expression, and one of the only ways you can express yourself within the company, is through drawing. And I had to sell this idea to the management. I had to communicate this idea to the model makers who used to work in full size, by hand. And in Italy, it was very common to use in those days plaster of Paris and hard foam. There was no clay, so if the modeler made a mistake, it was very hard to change that. So you have to really think about what you're designing. That product went on to be a very successful product in its segment. It had 50cc to 125cc versions. This was another one under the Piaggio brand. It was called the Energy. Again, liquid cooled, very funky scooter. Did and does very well. Of course, there's many more versions of the Energy now. This was another product under the Gilera brand. This was really bringing together the shape, form, sort of dynamics of a motorcycle, but using the architecture of a scooter. You could put the helmet into the fuel tank, actually. Then from there, of course, I hadn't studied really car design because my bachelor's was in product design. We didn't have automotive in those days. So I really wanted to study more. So the only way was to do a master's, and I really wanted to study at the Royal College in London, but it was, of course, prohibitively expensive. So I applied also. I applied to get in and managed to get in, but the funding was an issue, as you can imagine. So I also applied at that point to the INLAX Foundation. They have an INLAX scholarship, and fortunately, I was able to get that scholarship as well. And I spent 2 incredible years in London and in the Royal College, both of which are great teachers. The Royal College, as you know, is a masters only um, uh, sort of design school. It's the only one in the world. So everyone has already had a bachelor's degree there. And they come from all over the world, from Japan, China, Korea, you name it. I mean, every country you can think of, there are students there. So it gives you this perspective, which is phenomenal. And in that sort of London background, really opens up your eyes to the world. Again, when I graduated in early 2000s, wasn't a great time for jobs in Europe or America, to be fair. But I happened to have got an offer from a small company in Nagoya, which worked for Mitsubishi. So I took that chance, got on a plane, and shot across to Japan. And this is Tokyo on a Sunday. as opposed to Pontedera that I showed you earlier. But as alien, didn't speak a word of Japanese, didn't know anything about the culture, but was happy to be there. I started working in Mitsubishi, a large company, as you know. At that time, Mitsubishi and Daimler Chrysler were were partners actually. So the head of design in Mitsubishi was a gentleman called Olivier Boulet, who came across from Mercedes Benz, and he was running Mitsubishi design. And I got to know him sort of reasonably well within Mitsubishi. Did some really exciting projects. This was a Paris Dakar product called the L200, based on a L200, which is a pickup actually. L200 or Triton. This is a pickup. It's known as different names in different markets. And that did very, very well in the Paris Dakar race of 2003, 2004. And that's the car. Great project. Key moment 6 was when Daimler Chrysler and Mitsubishi actually split. And Olivier Boulet was going back to Mercedes Benz. And he asked me if I would like to join the studio he had established in Yokohama. So again, moved from Nagoya straight to Yokohama, worked on many, many projects. It was an advanced design center, which worked 7 or 8 years before a product was launched. That means if a current generation of product was launched in the market, this design center was already working on the next one. So that's how sort of, far ahead Mercedes-Benz was. And many projects there, of course, this was one of them. All of you may know the car called the SLK, which is small, light, kurz, which means small, light, and short. This is the SLK, one of the sketches from my proposal, which went on to end up on the final car. Of course, the front end was someone else's, but I was happy to get even a rear end into the market. So nothing is too small, in whatever capacity you're working. If you manage to get something into the market, it's a huge learning. It's a great achievement. So don't think that you have to get entire cars and entire bikes and an entire product into the market. Be a part of the team. If your contribution is valuable, and it makes it to the market, you would have achieved a lot, and more than that, you would have learned a lot. There are some conditions through all of this, for good design or great design, and I would sort of recommend you to note down these 7 or 8 spokes, as I call them. Right from imagination to society and culture, technology, marketing. Marketing is very, very fundamental to design. Please make marketing, your marketing department, your friend. I will tell you why. Suppliers, utility and function, of course. A product which doesn't do what it's supposed to do is useless. Legislation shapes design, believe it or not, it does. And of course, the environment. So a designer, has to balance these 8 spokes, and somewhere in the middle, that right balance creates actually great design. So the more you consider these 8 spokes and the more you know about them, the better it is for you as a designer. So if we go next, I left, of course, Mercedes-Benz through a various set of conversations with Tata Motors. And I joined Tata Motors in 2007 and then became the head of design in 2011. This is kind of a snapshot of where we are today. And if you see, most of these, let's say, spokes are actually undergoing immense change on a daily basis. I mean, if you look at society and culture, just when I made this slide maybe 6-8 weeks ago, people were talking about shared everything, shared mobility, shared offices, shared this, shared that. And then COVID hit us. And, now we probably will share very little actually in terms of physical spaces, environments, products. What happens to shared mobility? Lots of companies have invested over the last 2 or 3 years in that. And now going forward, I doubt very much that people will want to share mobility because of social distancing. So you can see, if you don't keep your eye on all these 8 spokes simultaneously, you can actually be left with a product that is either out of time, out of cost, out of place, or just is irrelevant. So, again, through your projects, through your life, keep these eight sort of, very, very simple spokes as a reference for yourselves. Of course, India, in the meanwhile, has changed so much. You can talk about the workplace, you can talk about recreation, how and where and what people eat, how India travels. Those are the two big airports. They probably look like this today because no one's flying through them really. Um, but at every level, India has changed, and it's very important that you can express that change. Unlike when I joined Piaggio in '98, when they said, "Here's a Lambretta, can we sell it in India, please?" That's not the vision of India, and that's not the reality of India. However, the reality is also this: as a designer, you are also in this hyper complex environment. I say hyper complex because I think India has the most challenging socio-economic design environment in any market in the world. A lot of my contemporary colleagues in other car companies, heads of design, say, designing for India and getting the balance right is extremely challenging. So, our real strength lies in understanding this. You can imagine, a 3 or 4 lane road in Delhi is being shared by almost 8 lanes. You can see when you fly into that fancy airport in Bombay, this is what you fly over on the right, the slums, or the traffic situation. How does that little red Maruti get out of the traffic jam? So our context is very, very complex, and that's what makes things interesting, actually. Of course, solutions, everyone talks about smart cities and this and that, and you will be part of that solution, hopefully. So when I joined the company, we were this little red dot, our brand position. People were buying us for utility and function, and not for aspiration and emotion. When people buy you for utility and function, they pay the least amount of money. Just think of anything you bought purely for utility, because you need a job done. That's not a great position to be in as a company, and this is where we were. And luckily, through the opportunities that I took and was given at Tata Motors, I wanted to move that red dot towards the right, where people were buying you because they aspired to buy a Tata car. They bought it for emotional reasons, and that's the role that design really has. So very quickly, I established within the teams something called impact design. The idea was that you make immediate impact with your product. This is mainly exterior design, and then you make a lasting impact over time, as people live with your product. That's interior design. And I made a very small set of guidelines for my design team because we had nothing. When I joined Mercedes, there was a 90-page manual on what is and what is not a Mercedes. But when I joined Tata Motors, there was nothing there for design. So I established this simple one-pager to just get people on the same page, really. At the same time, I was tasked with creating a design team and creating, some more studios. So we opened 2 studios in Europe, one in the UK and one in Italy, in Turin, and we expanded our studio in Pune. We also established a small office in Korea for commercial vehicles, because we have something called the Tata Daewoo commercial vehicles business. And I thought, Korea would be a very good place to tap into that expertise. So if you can see, it's a truly global sort of design network. But don't forget, I was having to build this while we were starting to design the first cars. So it's like building a ship while you're sailing. So it was very, very challenging. But again, you dig deep and you take the opportunity. That building on the right, incidentally, is the brand new facility we opened here in the UK. It's one of the largest design studios anywhere in the world. Um, Design and some R&D as well, and that's in Coventry. It's a great place to work, and again, very lucky that we could design that from scratch. So that studio Me and the team spent 4 years designing the studio, getting everything right as it should be. We are, of course, a, a team of 200 people, give or take. The last count, it was about 13 different nationalities. This is what makes it very exciting, very interesting. You really get the let's say the view of people from all over the world, of designers from all over the world. It's very interesting when you ask someone from America to design a car like a Tiago. The perspective is so different, but you get some fresh um, ideas from that. So it's very important to challenge and be challenged. Of course, the skill level is second to none. We have the entire range of design, let's say, professions within the design team, and the design expertise. So right from 2D hand sketching to Photoshop to clay, to colors, fabrics, materials. We have the entire range that we can do. Digital modeling, of course. So this is kind of the range that I had sort of inherited. But like I said, we moved so slowly, and India moved much faster than us, that our brand position was, like I showed you on the graph on the bottom left. And then we started, as I mentioned before. I was incredibly lucky to do a car like the Tiago, based on the Indica 20 years before it. We did a compact sedan called Tigor. When I told you legislation sometimes dictates design, Tigor is a perfect example. Under 4 meters is a category of cars which only exists in India, actually, because of an excise benefit. These kind of cars don't exist anywhere else. We do SUVs, minivans, sedans, everything under 4 meters, which is very hard for a global OEM designer to even imagine. We did the Hexa 7-seat SUV, and of course the Nexon. So these 4 cars were under that first wave of impact design. We at the same time started working on electrification within the company. I did a vision car, as you can see on the left, called e-Vision sedan, which I showed in 2018 with the team. We did Tiago. The Tigor EV is already in the market today. And with that, we reached a certain brand position, but we couldn't break through. So we needed a second wave of design, a second wave of product architecture, which would take us even further in that graph that I showed you. So here too, with our 2 new product architectures, we did a EV called the Altroz EV. This is again going to be launched very soon, following the Nexon EV, which is just launched in February. Started doing very well. Then we got hit by COVID, but we sold 200 cars in the first month. Altroz will follow that. Here's a little bit of the journey of the Altroz. Typical, uh, very, very high quality sketch work, digital work, and then clay, and then of course the final product. The whole process takes us roughly 3.5 years now, from sheet of paper to sheet of steel. Lots of people involved. It's a great team to be part of. We of course did the Harrier and its let's say cousin, the Buzzard. This will also come soon into the market now in India, as soon as we are able to launch products again. Given the lockdown, everything's sort of going at a slower pace now. We also look at smaller, newer segments. So this was the H2X concept, which was the first product we did in the new studio, actually, in the UK. And this again is a new category of SUV, which we will be addressing. Again, will be launched this year. We of course take part in Geneva the last 20 years. Just this year we couldn't because it got cancelled. But 2019, we had 5 brand new cars, and it created a huge impact, literally, in the automotive world. But the design team also designed the stand, the display, the graphics, everything that you see. It's very, very important that design, uh, uh, shows a consistent face of the company to the customer. And this is where I said, be friends with your marketing colleagues, because usually taking part in auto shows is something that the marketing team does, and they go and do their own thing, which can lead to very confused brand statements. Believe me, you may take this for granted, but very few companies have this real holistic view. So, as a designer and a design team, or in my case, as the head of design, I was able to work with the colleagues in marketing, and we designed all our stands and now our future showrooms. And you can see how, with Impact One, the dot somewhere moved, to the center. People started recognizing us, started talking about us. And as we did new concepts, this is the latest one we showed in February. We brought back an iconic nameplate, as you know, Sierra. But we did it for a new era. And this is why I told you, understand history, don't be a slave to it. We could have very easily done a stylistic redesign of the original Sierra, but it wouldn't have had any meaning really. So we looked at what a Sierra would mean in this day and age, with the considerations of those 8 spokes that we have today, and that was the outcome. It's born electric actually. If when we do it, it'll be electric. You see, we removed all the sort of digital screens from the interior. We wanted to have this real digital detox. I think people will come to that. You're surrounded by screens all the time. When you go into your car, you just maybe want a little bit of digital detox and peace. So that's something we were, sort of foreseeing. And I'm sure after we get out of COVID, where we're all stuck to our screens now even more than before, this sort of reaction to the digital world will happen, and people will want a lot more of less. So with some of these cars, the Altroz, the Harrier, the Vision sedan, the Sierra, with Impact 2, we've started moving our needle even further towards the aspirational and emotional side of purchase. Just quickly, I'll take you through. Of course, we do commercial vehicles. Again, a very wide range from 500 kilo payload to 45 tons. So you can imagine the span. Here too, we had a very disparate range because of the way they were designed and the time they were designed. So when we took over, I created again a very simple visual device called this trust bar. People buy Tata products because of trust, and I wanted to express that, in our trucks. And I put these 2 words together, premium and tough, which are sometimes opposing words, but that tension creates actually some very good solutions. Of course, in the commercial vehicles, there's defense, there's trucks, there's small commercial, there's buses, pickups, vans. So how do you harmonize that range? How does someone look at the face of the product and say it's a Tata? So like I said, the first thing we did was start putting this trust bar across the faces of the trucks, because sometimes the intervention you can make is very small. You don't always get a chance to redesign an entire product. So you got to start somewhere. And then, of course, we got a chance to redesign an entire product. It's called the Intra. It's a small commercial vehicles, 1,000 kilo capacity. And here is where, mixing up our car design and truck design team, we really got the distinct benefit of both teams working together. When I joined the company, there was a CV team and a PV team, and there was a wall in between. So there was no cross learning. Within the year that I joined, I literally broke that physical and mental wall. And you can see when car designers start designing trucks, they have a very different approach. It's more human-centered actually. So that's the truck which we launched last November, doing very, very well in its segment. It's the first little truck with air conditioning, with and many, many other features. I mean, this is a design story in itself, which can take me an hour to talk about how we designed this truck. But just suffice to say that lots of touches in this truck came from the passenger car world, and this was to do with respecting the operator or the driver. Truck drivers are one of the least respected professionals in India, which is very sad. And we will, as a country, face a huge problem going forward. Already, there's a 25% shortage of truck drivers. In the future, there'll be more. So if you don't respect them, if you don't give them an environment of work, because this is a work environment, which makes it better, easier, more comfortable for them to operate, they will get out of this business completely. So, we were lucky to be able to convince our engineering, marketing, finance colleagues that we should start doing these things, bringing in a bit of color from the outside, bringing in air conditioning, bringing in power steering, digital clusters, all of this never seen in a small truck before. Of course, we do buses, we do others, and also as EVs. So, like I said, this focus on the customer, understanding customers is important. In the last 3 or 4 years, how do you gauge you're doing well? Not everything is about market share and sales. It's also about mind share. I see a lot of people on a daily basis send me pictures of their Tata cars, and selfies and communities. There's Tiago Owners Club. Each of the cars actually has a owners club now, which never happened before. So somewhere you see this sort of emotional connect is and has happened, and you can see a car is so much more than just a inanimate product. It really opens up your life, lets you access mountains, oceans, sea, friends, colleagues. It's a real vehicle in many senses of the word. I particularly like that image in the lower center, this 3-year-old girl hugging her Nexon, and that's amazing. Who would hug a car? But the picture I like the most is actually this one from Kedar, one of our customers from Maharashtra, who's actually kissing his car, and this is a grown man. How many of you have kissed a washing machine or a toaster? So cars have this unique ability to create emotion. So this is where we are. That's sort of my personal and professional journey of the last 20 years, all summarized in this sort of one picture. So I think I'll stop sharing that and go back to yeah. So was that okay? Could people see? I don't know. It's very difficult to just speak into a screen.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Pratap, there's such a beautiful way you have described the whole journey and a lot of inputs to the students and to us also. Yeah. Um, we have already written down some questions from the students. Uh,
Yes.
so we can address those things, and then later on we'll go through the new questions which our students are asking.
Okay. Sure. Sure.
So, so if you don't mind, I'll read out the questions.
Yeah.
Uh,
Please. We can take them one by one. Yeah.
yeah, would you like to hear? We would like to hear from you the challenges and opportunities that helped you to achieve in your career. Please mention the qualities in you that helped you to achieve the goal.
So I think some of this would have been hopefully covered in what I just spoke about. I think one is to always stay curious. That's very important. Keep learning. I think every day you learn something new, regardless of what stage you are in your professional career. I mean, I'm learning so much even now that we are all locked at home, learning new ways of working, learning new skills. So stay curious. I think the great thing about a designer is that usually designers ask questions that no one else really thinks of. So that's fundamental.
Yeah.
There's a request from the students. I think they want to see you. Would it be okay to switch your camera on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Good.
On popular demand.
So one more question. So in your time you have gone abroad and for job and studies. Most few jobs were done outside India. What is the difference in terms of job scenario between India and outside India when you talk of transportation?
Job scenario in what respect? I don't know in exactly what is it, availability of jobs, or
Probably,
what's the?
yeah, probably the quantities of job or types of job.
I think that's very relative, of course, where you are. There's more jobs, but there's also more competition for the same job. So because if you're working in a European studio, for example, anyone from any 20 any of the 28 European countries can work without any sort of restriction. So I think that's very relative. It's hard to really explain what it does. What my in my limited experience is that I got to work on products which are global, products which sell in 150 countries. I think that perspective is the real difference. More than is it harder or easier to get the job? So
True, true. And one more question is, how much research is required by the transportation designers for designing for future mobility? What type of research they should do and they should specialize in?
yeah, this is very important. I think research is continuous. We don't necessarily start researching something when a program starts. I mean, you have to continuously be immersed in what's going on around you. And this is why I said, if you keep those 8 spokes that I showed you earlier, if you keep that on your softboard, I keep it on my softboard in any company I go to, because I always carry that with me. That am I and are we staying abreast with developments in all those 8 areas? So research, trend spotting is very, very important. Do it on a continuous basis. A designer shouldn't stop researching. A bird doesn't stop flying. So a designer never stops researching. The mind is always thinking, looking, reacting. So that rich amount of constant sort of staying involved in society around you is important. Of course, for some projects we do specific research. So like that truck which I showed you, we did 3 months of immersive research in the field. I sent all my designers to the marketplace, to the sabzi mandi, to the factory, to speak to the driver, speak to every stakeholder of the business. I sent them to the factory as well, our own, to speak to to the assembly line worker. You have to know in and out of the entire let's say, so the value chain, so that you can intervene at every part of that value chain. Is something easy or difficult for someone to assemble? Is something easy to replace? Is something easy to if it breaks, can you swap it out for something? So the more you know about what that specific product is, of course you'll design it better. Like I said, that project is that, and any other project that we've done is in itself 1.5 hour lecture.
Yeah, yeah. One question is here on PhD in design. Do you see the relevance of PhD in design when we talk of automotive design or transportation design?
I mean, personally, I would see it more if you are getting into, if you have an intention of getting into academia, if you want to teach, etc., or you want to join some sort of mobility think tank. But apart from that, I don't think it helps you necessarily work in any OEM studio. Not necessarily. But yes, a PhD can be useful depending on what you do your PhD in. But certainly in if you're leaning towards academia, or you're leaning towards think tank, um, consultants who work in the transportation area, a PhD may be useful.
Yeah, yeah. Very good. Uh, how important is clay modeling in automotive design? How difficult it was to start in Tata Motors? When you joined Tata Motors, there were no clay modeling, there were no design studios as such. How
Yeah.
how was the story
So
for?
clay modeling for me and for most design studios actually is central to the process. I say this always: clay modeling is not just a printout of your design. It is actually a medium uh, in which you design. It's very important to have an idea of the proportion, the size of a car, because don't forget, the management team or the management committee, which may sign off a 1,000 crore investment, will not do that based on a picture on a wall. They want to touch, feel, see, how big this product that's going to come out in 2 years is going to be. They need to be very, very sure of what it looks like. So there's no sort of substitute for clay modeling, regardless of how good visualization digitally is. Having said that, we use, of course, both. We go digital, physical, digital, physical. It's an iterative process. But in my time, I don't see sort of clay modeling disappearing. It was hard to start it off in the Tata Motors India studio. Of course, we had it in UK and Italy because it's prevalent there. But in India, we managed to hire almost every clay modeler that was available, and now we have a full-fledged clay modeling studio in India as well. So all three studios have great clay modeling skill, capacity, ability.
Yeah. That's so. Similar type. One more question is there, which is the how is it with regard to softwares like digital design in case of transportation design?
Yeah, I mean, we use very
What the different
similar
software?
software to any one of you are probably using in college already. So there's a lot of Photoshop for 2D work. I personally have moved to an iPad, and I use a software called Procreate. It lets me draw very fast and feed that back to the chief designers. In the visualization, we use Blender, we use VRED. In digital modeling, we use Alias, and of course for final surface design, we use ISOMSurf. That's our Class A surface release. So these are some of the software we use. Nothing revolutionary, but we use them all.
When you look for the students who are coming for bachelor studies in transportation design, what are the basic elements we should look for, or how should we make a judgment that they are suitable for transportation design?
I think one is you have to love, transportation. You have to love cars and buses and trucks. That's got to be your absolute passion. Without that passion, I think it's very difficult to be a designer in any field. Because, like I said, for us, it takes 4 years to go from a drawing on paper to a car hitting the showroom. And you have to maintain that passion and intensity for those 4 years. 4 years is a long time. If you think about it, you can build a house in a year, but a car, right from beginning to the end, is a 4.5 year process. So if you aren't passionate about that, it's very hard to sustain. So when you get into transportation design, make sure you really love cars. Make sure you're getting in for the right reason. You want to make a difference. You think that cars of the future and mobility in the future will be different, and you want to play a role in that. Do it for those right reasons rather than, okay, I have an interest in cars, so let me just dabble. I get hundreds of messages every day. Someone who does sort of drawing as a hobby and says, can I be a car designer? No, you have to eat, breathe, live this profession like any other, by the way. So if you're a doctor, you have to be passionate about that. If you're a pilot, you have to be passionate about flying. So don't choose a profession because you've seen someone else and it looks nice. Do it because you really want to do it.
Yeah. Now, there are some questions from the students. I'll read out. Um, what somebody asked what the logo of Tata Motors means.
The logo of Tata Motors, well, Tata Motors doesn't have a logo of its own. It's a group logo, comes from the Tata Group, which shows two things. One is a sort of road in perspective. That's a trunk of a tree, and the two branches are actually sort of weighed downwards because Mr. Tata really believes that the tree with the most fruit actually hangs the lowest. So that's what it is. The road shows a path to the future, and the hanging or the drooping sort of main branches show that it's a company which is humble. So we don't have a separate Tata Motors logo.
One question is on how is it transportation design different from automotive design?
It's not really different, but transportation design would also encompass things like boats and ships and trains, whereas automotive is more cars, bikes, trucks and buses. So automotive is actually a part of transportation design.
And one question is, should you choose the company or see the person whom you will be working under?
Yeah, this is very important. Look at both if you can. You, of course, sometimes can't choose either. You don't always have the choice. You take the first job you get, but eventually, you should try and you should choose your boss or you should choose your company. I mean, for me, the choice was very simple. Ratan Tata and Tata Group. For me, there was almost no difference between the person and the company, and make sure your ethical values, your personal values have a resonance with the company you're working for or you want to work for, because if there's that fundamental disconnect, then you won't last there very long. So choose very carefully if you have the choice. If you don't have the choice, go for what you get. Sometimes you don't have the luxury, especially when you're graduating. You won't have the luxury of choice, so you will have to take what you get, but make that a learning experience. But always in your mind, think of where you want to go and who you want to work for.
True, true. One more question is, how important is it working with hands in design, especially in the era of technology?
Oh, very important. We are still selling a product to other human beings. So the touch of the hand, and this is exactly why we do the clay models. The touch of the hand is brings just one level of let's say humanness or humanity to any product. We've seen when we go from digital straight to a physical sort of printout, there's a level of hardness, and this bit of humanity comes when you touch it by hand. And this is what I learned in Italy, actually, initially. The modelers, when they work on the hard modelers in foam or in plaster, like I said, they don't have clay. They needed to move their hands in a certain way, and if their hands were twisting or if there was some discomfort, they would actually tell me as a young designer that, Pratap, maybe you want to look at this surface again because it's not natural. So those are the words they would use to describe it. They would use very human words to describe surfaces. Natural, soft, flowing, fluid, whatever you want to call it, subtle. That's not something you necessarily associate with a technical sort of software. So the touch of the hand is fundamental.
So there is a question of on the design process. So in the car design or in the automotive design, how do you follow the design process? What kind of process do you follow?
Oh, we follow the classical design process. Like I told you, before we start a project, we spend almost 6 months researching around that project, something very specific to that product, actually. Like I mentioned, Intra or Tiago or whatever it is. And then, yeah, it starts with probably 500-600 sketches that the three design studios would make. Uh, they don't all come to me. Obviously, the studio chief designers filter through those. I get to see about 30 or 40 of those. Then we whittle that down to about 12. And then at the management level, to the managing director, and the chairman, I show only 6 options and sometimes only 3. Because sometimes you can confuse them with too many options. So I have my process of sort of down selecting, but we show 6, like I said, at a sort of digital level. Then we make 3 full-size models, and then we choose one of those full-size models to go into production. So that's roughly the process. So 12 to 6 to 3 to 1.
Okay. One question is there for how do you differentiate between automotive design and styling?
Sorry?
How do you differentiate between automotive design and styling?
Styling, yeah. So very, very simple. Automotive, what I call design or the architecture, is actually the bones, the structure, the bones of the vehicle. that you can't change. You can't change your bone structure, you're born with it. What you can change is the clothes you put on top. So today I want to look sporty, or I want to look serious, I want to look formal. It's the same bones, but if you wear a suit, you look a certain way. If you wear a t-shirt, you look something else. So that's styling. So the design is actually the architecture of the product, where styling is what you want to convey, by how you treat that. Do you want a car to look sporty? Do you want it to look formal? So the same architecture can have many, many different types of style. So that's how you should look at it. And in Tata, we are very lucky that we get to work at the design and style level. The new architectures that I spoke to you about, Harrier and Altros, we were part of the architecture design of those cars. That means we knew exactly where we wanted the wheels, what size, the cabin to body ratio, all of that we defined as a design team. This is very rare and it doesn't happen very often. So if you ever get a chance to be a part of architecture definition, you must take it. But you must understand architecture of cars very, very carefully. If you have a bad architecture, then there's very little you can do through styling. So, for example, if you're sort of a fat guy like me, to look thin, I sometimes wear vertical stripes. In rugby, people wear horizontal stripes because it makes them look broader. You can only do very little at that point, but fundamentally you can't change the architecture. So once that's done, and if your wheels are too small, or if they're too far inboard, or your cabin is very high, whatever, you can't fix that. Then you'll have to do lots of sort of styling lines to try and make something look less tall or less narrow or whatever, but then that's too late. So focus on architecture.
There is a question for like somebody's portfolio, if it is totally in two-wheeler design, are you going to
Totally, sorry.
totally in two-wheeler design like bikes design? Are you going to consider that for Tata Motors?
It will be difficult, let me be honest, because then I don't know how that person thinks about our products. Of course, I can understand the design process, you can understand the thinking process, you can understand the skill levels, but I'm seeing this from my own personal experience. When I went from Piaggio and I wanted to design cars, I joined the Royal College just because of that. So that you get this right. Like I said, the architecture of cars is very different from bikes. Many bike designers struggle with cars. Many car designers struggle with bikes, because they're fundamentally different products. It's like, saying if you are a heart surgeon, can you do brain surgery? You could, because you're basically a doctor, but you need the training. You need the training.
Yes. How to get into the Tata Motors as a designer?
I think like any company, guys and girls, we look for the best talent there is. We are all in a very fortunate situation that there are fewer jobs than applicants, unfortunately, in that sense. So only the best of the best will get a job. So yeah, we are spoiled for choice. But I look for the way someone thinks. I look for skill. There's no two ways about it. Like I said, visual language is one of your only languages. You are not always going to be in a room to be able to explain to me or to the management. Your drawing has to do the talking. So for me, skill is very, very important, but also the understanding of the subject and the way of getting to a solution, the journey someone follows. I find that very interesting, and me and my chief designers look for that. uh, so it's a good balance of skill and thinking ability. So it's design thinking and design doing.
Yeah, that's the thing. And one more question. Do you have a plan to produce motorcycle?
No, we don't. I don't think we'll be able to do something meaningful. If I'm honest, the motorcycle market is anyway way overcrowded. If you can't bring something new in terms of a product proposition, technology or design or whatever it is, then I think you shouldn't get into it. So not doing something is as important as doing something else. So in our case, not doing motorbikes is something that works for us.
One question is there: is it enough to have a graduation degree in transportation design, or should we go for masters?
I think, yeah, usually when people apply to me, I look really at the portfolio. I don't look at the degrees and all of that. I start from page number 2, because page number 1 is the CV. So, I really don't look at which college. I don't look at what they've, are they graduate, are they, bachelors, or are they masters? For me, what comes on that page 2 onwards is important.
So, how do you see the future of the transportation designers? Meaning, in
I think
terms
it's
of
very
what?
interesting. It's very interesting, especially with what has happened to the world today. The whole thing has got even more complex and therefore more challenging and therefore more exciting. I think the more challenging something is, the more exciting it can be. We were talking about shared mobility only 2 months ago, and I don't think going forward anyone will talk about shared mobility anymore, because of purely what has happened in the world today. So it'll be interesting to see what the reaction of society is towards or from, when we come out of this mess. uh, I have a feeling people will really want to protect themselves and their families, etc., and move back to personal mobility. I think mass mobility and shared mobility will be challenged for a few years from now, till we don't get a vaccine and all that. But people will be very, very afraid to share mobility, in my view.
So, any other questions people have, you can write in the chat box, because in the QA box only I can see some questions, but in the chat box is free. You can write in the chat box.
So I think there are around 60 odd questions, but I don't know how much time, Pratap, you have, because you're a busy man.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm gonna, we got a little delayed on this one, and I've got another meeting waiting. But
Sure.
if there's a compendium of questions you want to just put down and send it to Kirsty, maybe I can take a look, and because I'm sure many of the questions overlap, so
Yes.
we can come back with some responses which probably answers most of them, or at least some of them. So if you can do that, just copy paste and send them to Kirsty.
Sure.
We can ping across some answers. That's for sure.
Sure. And also we'll like to have one more session if possible in after 2-3 weeks or whenever you are free. So that will be good also.
Okay, let me just check, because as this session itself took us some time, unfortunately, to organize. Because we've gone into this new mode of working. It's just there's almost there's less free time now than there ever was, even when I was going to the studios. Because everyone's just back to back putting in meeting requests. So just give us some time on that, and she'll get back to you.
I totally appreciate the time that you've given us. In fact,
It was wonderful.
because I'm very keen for you to visit UPS design.
Yeah, Manisha, you've spoken to me about it already, and I would have loved to have come, and we almost, we I'm sure would have come by now, but as all travel is now completely stopped for even the foreseeable future. So, but I'm sure I'll be able to make it at some point.
Yes, really hoping for that. It'll really inspire our students.
I hope at least in this way that we tried today, we could get some key messages across, and I hope it's been useful in any case, for students and faculty and aspirants. Like I said, very, very few jobs will be created in automotive design on an annual basis. So you have to be amongst the top sort of 1%. You have to be the best. Otherwise, I would, I don't know, I won't say discourage, but I would look at getting into transportation design very carefully. Like I said, do it for the right reason, and do it only if you think you can be amongst the best globally. Don't forget, any company in the world today can hire globally. So the competition is fierce out there. I don't want to sugarcoat, the presentation. The competition is fierce, but if you're good and if you have conviction, I think you will make it through as well.